All right. Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Results Loading Podcast hosted by Prosperous AI. I'm your host, Michael Atkin, and today we're really excited to be joined by someone with a deep and diverse background in the construction and engineering industry. Our guest, Andy Williamson, currently serving as a director of operations at Concrete Strategies, has over 15 years of experience in managing complex construction projects as well as civil design. From working as a civil engineer to leading teams through multi-million-dollar general contracting projects, Andy definitely has a wealth of knowledge in building and maintaining strong foundations for success. We'll dive into how he's managed to navigate the challenges of the industry, lead high-performing teams, and foster strong partnerships. I'll let him tell you all about it more himself. But with all that being said, Andy, welcome. Thanks so much for agreeing to be on the show today, man.
No problem. Excited to be here. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's easy to introduce you. But with that being said, Andy, we like to start at the beginning. Can you take us back to the beginning of your career? How did you first get involved in construction and engineering industries? Kind of walk us through how we got to this point.
So I guess I'll go back to when I started undergrad. Kind of happened upon college, got accepted to the University of Delaware. Wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. Talked to my dad about it, and he's kind of like, well, you're good at science, you're good at math. Why don't you go be an engineer? My dad, back in the day, he built a bunch of spec houses. He's an accountant, so he's, nowhere near construction or engineering or something like that. But he's like, we like these spec houses I build. Mike Noto is one of his friends. He does a lot of developments. He's like, he's an engineer. You can do something like that. I'm like, oh, yeah, that is interesting. All right, I'll do that. So that's about as, complex as it was selected by major. So went into civil engineering, loved it through all 4 years at Delaware. Got out, didn't really know you could go into construction, as stupid as it sounds. I've spent the majority of my career in it now. Thought you could really only do design engineering. So came out and started doing land development engineering. So, any building that goes up, you need a civil engineer on it, do all the permitting for both stormwater, the utilities, and all that good stuff. So did that for about 5 years, enjoyed it, kind of enjoyed the process of designing. I worked on a variety of different sites, from, an open field where we need to, figure out how the utilities are there and how to grade it and stuff like that to, an urban site that's been redeveloped a million times. And you open up the ground, there's all these utilities you didn't know about, or buried brick from an old building or something like that. So really liked the creative portion of it and sort of, I'm sounding artsy fartsy, but sort of like molding it to make it all work. I didn't necessarily love doing a lot of paperwork, which unfortunately is a majority of what that is. There's a lot of permits that you have to get for this stuff to check a lot of boxes and satisfy a lot of people's wants, needs, etc. So, the other thing, I really always wanted to go to business school too. It was kind of in the back of my head. I thought, I'll either stick with engineering and, if I get a business degree, it'll help me be that much more prepared if I move into management. Because notice a lot of the guys, they're engineers, they come up as engineers, they kind of learn their business skills trial by fire. I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to it, but that was kind of my experience. So I thought it's not going to help, hurt me to have a bigger, bag of tricks, so to speak. Plus, I was kind of toying with the idea of like, I don't know, maybe I could do something else. Maybe I'll go into management consulting or finance or something like that. So did my MBA. I actually did it full time, but remotely while I was still working. Finished that up and kind of started looking for management consulting or finance jobs. Fortunately, it was coming to the recession. A lot of the guys had the same idea as me, so didn't really get a lot of traction with that. I just kind of happened upon one of my buddies forwarded my resume along to one of his college pals who worked in DC for a company called Balfour Beatty. He sent it to HR. I didn't really think much of it. And they reached out and said like, hey, did you ever think of working, a career in construction? We love your engineering background combined with the business. We think it'd be a good fit. I lied. I was like, yeah, absolutely. At that point, I just needed a job. I was getting married. My wife already had a job in DC. I needed to find something. So interviewed and I kind of like, oh, this still, uses my background as an engineer. Whereas if I did management or finance consulting, something like that, I'd basically be starting from scratch. Because they're like, you have experience, but it's not what we do. But it was more business oriented. And there was really like a well-defined career progression path, which I really liked. My experience as a design engineer, I'm sure it depends on which company you work for. I kind of work for a small family run organization. Great. Everybody's got a heart to goal, would do anything for you. Felt like you're working for your family, but there's the principals at the top, and until they retired, like there was no real moving up. And there was probably 20 other guys around my age. So not much room to grow really there. So just kind of happened upon it. So from there, worked in DC for about 8 years, working on all sorts of crazy kind of projects. We worked on the Capitol Crossing project where they secured the air rights over 395. We had a team that rerouted the highways underneath at night to build a platform over top of it. Then we put 2 office buildings on top of it. Just wild. Tons of crazy stuff like that. I can certainly get into more specifics if you want. I don't want to be too long-winded with this, though. As time went on, my wife and I first got married when we moved there. No kids, not tied down. We both worked crazy hours, but, it was fun. Went out on the weekend in D.C. Moved out to the suburbs, had kids. And all of a sudden, after about 8 years, we just kind of turned to each other and we're like, why are we in DC? We have no family here. We spent half our lives in the car. Like, this stinks. Like, we love our jobs, but there's no reason we couldn't do this elsewhere. So that kind of got the gears turning about potentially moving maybe closer to family in the Philadelphia suburbs. We did that about 5 years ago. It was just awesome. Now I spend, maybe 45 minutes at most a day in the car traveling. So spend a lot more time with the kids and stuff. So worked for another general contractor for a few years doing apartments. Really loved that, helped them grow their office. We almost doubled our headcount. We went from doing about 1 project at a time to 3 while I was there. It was kind of like the number 2 on the project management side of things. Really loved working there. Wasn't planning on leaving, but then got presented with an opportunity. Concrete Strategies and opened a regional office in the Philadelphia suburbs where they're going to manage all their work in the Northeast. Really, they travel anywhere and just about everywhere in the U.S. to do work. It was a much bigger footprint, different model. I'd never worked for a subcontractor before, but kind of took the leap of faith. It was a good opportunity. The office was 1 town over from my house, so that kind of solved the commute issue. And here I am.
Yeah, so no, fantastic, and a lot to break down there. And I think, an important aspect about your background specifically is I have a lot of operations directors, VP of operations here on the show, but not all of them have that engineering background. So can you dive in a little bit more into the advantages that your engineering background has played in your more recent careers, especially as you've gotten more into operations? I know to your point earlier, you were saying, could do finance, got your MBA, but still kind of not stuck, but pigeonholed a little bit in that engineering space. Now you're in operations and you kind of get to have the best of both worlds, as you know. You dive a little bit deeper into us, Andy, for, as to how your engineering background acts as an advantage into what you're doing in the day-to-day these days, as well as in the past as well.
Sure. I mean, I think in all, I'll call them 3 phases of my career. So working in design engineering, working for a general contractor, and working for a subcontractor, all similar, but some differences. I think one of the biggest ones is like where you fall in the communication chain and what phase of a construction project you come in at. So if you're an engineer, you're on the front end, you're talking directly with the owner as well as the other designers. If you're a general contractor, you interact with the owner, somewhat with the architect. Usually they're sort of the lead, but not quite as much. And it's, by the time you're involved, unless it's like design build or an integrated design, it's, fully designed, it's ready to roll and you're building it. If you're working for a subcontractor, you talk to the general contractor and you really have little to no interaction with the owner or the designers. So all that said, I think, all different experience levels, particularly with the engineering, kind of taught me how to communicate to each of those parties. There's definitely nuances to it, know different personalities types, how people generally, want to be communicated to, how to sort of best solve issues with them and that sort of thing. So it helps me to kind of collaborate on different levels.
Totally. And then you're not necessarily interacting with engineers all the time, but you do have that engineering mind. And now you're dealing with, supply chain, manufacturing, the business side, everything in between. How are we handling those situations when, not everybody may be having that engineering background? The reason I ask is, as you know, engineers have that engineering mind, very calculated, very direct. Are you seeing a lot of challenges in terms of team management, operational management, when not everybody may have that similar mindset to what you have had and what you've, how you've been trained the last 10, 15 years in the industry?
I mean, potentially. I think really good engineers, really good communicators in general, can cater whatever the message is so it makes sense to everybody. I think one of the things I did mention before that was kind of a side benefit that I never really thought of in working in engineering, a lot of what you do is in AutoCAD, so you need to be pretty good at visually representing things. So now if there's an issue in the field, like I'm a real visual guy, I think a lot of people are, I'll take a picture or a detail and kind of color code it and add notes, and it just helps to communicate what we're trying to say a little bit better. I think a lot of engineers sort of want to fully digest something and feel comfortable with it. They have a drawing sort of stating all of it and itemizing the steps and stuff like that. They'll probably feel more comfortable with it than if you just like call them on the phone and say like, hey, I'm going to do this X, Y, and Z. Does this sound good?
Right.
It's not to generalize. I think some guys in construction, time is everything, need the answer now. That's sort of how they go about things.
Yeah, exactly. And with that being said, Andy, I mean, how are you approaching like those large scale projects? I know Concrete Strategies is doing what, 500 million in revenue these days. You said you have 800, 1,000 employees across the greater US. I mean, how are we approaching large scale projects with all these moving parts, especially when you're managing staff and coordinating with various stakeholders? How are you bringing that all together and maximizing the efficiency and productivity given timelines or everything, especially in operations?
Sure. I mean, I think planning's everything. And I tell these general contractors, like, I'd love to help out as early as possible with these bids. If you have a napkin sketch and you want my input, I'm happy to give it to you. I'd rather, especially with these warehouses, they're all fairly similar. I can give you feedback on it on the most efficient, best way to build it or what I think on it. The earlier I can get involved, the more the gears start turning and I can sort of plan for it. Another thing we do once it's at the bid phase, a lot of these pursuits, we're trying to be a little bit more selective, but put a little more effort into our bid process as well. Not just turn in a one-page proposal with a price, but give as much detail, add alternates, ideas for saving money, things they may want to add or take away and stuff like that. And we'll do sequencing drawings as well as schedules to go with it. So that's sort of something we'd have to do anyway if we were awarded the project, but it starts that process earlier and helps communicate to the client, what we're looking at.
Yeah, and can you break down a little bit further? I mean, Concrete Strategies, obviously you guys do huge concrete projects, but you're not just pouring concrete. I mean, it's so much more than that. Can you break that down a little bit more as to what the day-to-day looks like for you if you're able to, and why some of these intricacies are so important? You have to put an emphasis on planning. It's not like, oh, we're going to go and just lay concrete for some guy's driveway. I mean, you guys are doing industrial, commercial, huge scale projects. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit further if possible?
No, absolutely. So, I mean, we do large projects. That's kind of our specialty. We've done up to over 1 million square foot warehouse, which, you hear that, you're like, that sounds absurd. When you see it, it's even more absurd how big it is.
What are they putting in their cruise ships? I mean, like,
yeah, right.
really?
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
Tons of racking and crazy machinery and stuff. It's pretty cool to see when it's finished. But, in order to do that and successfully hit the schedule, we have to do pours up to 40 to 50,000 square feet at a time, which is, depending on the thickness of the slab, 900 to 1,000 cubic yards of concrete. So for those who aren't as familiar, each concrete truck you see on the street's about 10 cubic yards. So, that could be 100 trucks we're running through there every single day. So a lot of logistics involved with that, a lot of factors involved. If it's a large enough project, we can set up a concrete batch plant on site. So we kind of control the supply. It doesn't have to travel as far. You don't have to worry about trucks sitting in traffic and delaying the pour or potentially expiring because they've sat there too long. But there's a lot of planning that goes into that, and you essentially control the entire supply chain. So you have to bring in the sand, the cement, the aggregate, all that stuff. You have to find storage space on site for it. You have to make sure you don't run out. On other projects where it's not feasible, either due to space or there's just not enough concrete involved in the project for it to be worthwhile, you're kind of limited by where the ready mix plant is, how far it is, what their capacity is, and how busy they are. So a lot of planning that goes into that. So that's kind of harkens back to what I said earlier. We like to start the planning process as early as possible and sort of know what we're getting into, figure out the basic game plan to build the box.
Yeah, I mean, 100 trucks in a day, that's not nothing. I mean, I've had other operations directors, supply chain executives on here who are discussing, predictive analytics, planning for the weather. I haven't heard the traffic one yet, though, just general Northeast traffic. How are you alleviating, you have 100 trucks in the Northeast region, which you're predominantly covering. How are you just are they getting there at like 4 a.m. to alleviate any potential of accidents, traffic in general? Because if the concrete does expire, they left on time, but it's like, shoot, I got caught in like an 1.5-hour traffic jam. I mean, how are we planning for stuff like that? That's the first time I've heard traffic thus far.
Sure.
It's interesting.
So I think a few different things on that. I mean, we like to go into eyes wide open when we're bidding the project. Project in, New York City suburbs, northern New Jersey is gonna be a lot different than one in, Farmer Joe's old field and out towards Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We build in both areas. So, the northern New Jersey ones, we certainly take traffic into account. We love starting pours as early as possible. I mean, we'll start in the middle of the night if they'll let us. We're running into more and more lately is restrictions on our work hours. So if we know that up front, we can adjust the pour sizes. So if we can't start till 6 o'clock in the morning, we know we need to get dumped out before traffic gets real bad. We're probably going to do smaller pours, which will cost a little bit more. But if we know that going in, we can sort of figure out the logistics of that. If we can start in the middle of the night, we can, dump concrete all night long while people start sleeping before rush hour happens.
Sure. And like a 1,000,000 square foot warehouse, I mean, how long does it take you to pour 1,000,000 square feet, for example? A few days? I mean, if you can get 100 trucks in there in a day, I mean, I guess you said 100 trucks would equate to 50,000 square feet. So maybe 3 weeks for a 1,000,000 square foot warehouse, then you can still knock that out in less than a month, more or less.
It depends. If we have a batch plant on site and it's solely servicing that job, we could move really, really fast and try to pour 5 days a week. The issue is, you have to take weather into account. If we have something go wrong with the pour and the crews are running like a 20-hour pour day, those guys need to sleep. They can't come the next day. It's just unsafe and irresponsible for us to try to ask them with that.
Yeah, they're like flight attendants or pilots.
Right.
Yeah, they time out, man. I get it.
If we're using an offsite plant, we're sort of subject to what other orders they have as well. Because if we do, 1,000 yard pour in a day, that usually wipes out a fixed plant for the full day. Maybe they can help, pour some driveways or something that day, but they're really not doing many other big commercial orders. They have several other projects. We usually figure out getting 2.5 pours a week. So.
Right. Okay. So yeah, no, Andy, I want to switch gears a little bit in terms of managing all of this and like leadership style a little bit, if you will. But before I get into that, is there anyone you can accredit your career growth to? I mean, now director of operations for a busy territory. I mean, can you credit mentors or specific experiences in terms of the efficiency and optimization that you're bringing to your business every single day? I mean, what does that look like? Maybe your 20s, 30s, I'm not sure if it's specific experiences, individuals who have helped you get to this point and get to this mindset that you can in turn, create that environment for, like I said, optimize efficiency within your teams as well.
Sure. I mean, I think everybody has mentors or people who've helped them along the way. If they say they don't, they're just kidding themselves. I think it starts, as early as birth, really. I did so many, I don't even think I can name them all. But, first and foremost, my dad, he was constantly, I'm not going to lie, I was pretty lazy in high school. And even undergrad, I joke like I didn't learn to study till I got to grad school. It's a little facetious, but it's somewhat true. He always harped on me. He's like, even if I got B's and A's, he's like, no, you could do better than that. At the time, it was like in one ear and out the other. But, all these things he's told me over the years, I find myself saying them and thinking them and stuff. So I think his work ethic and, not accepting just good enough really has sat with me for a long time. I've had tons of guys along the way who've helped me too. I don't even want to try to start naming them because I'm going to forget people, but
the point is they do exist, right? I mean,
yeah.
Mostly to your point, like if someone says, oh, I've never had a mentor, they're kidding themselves or they're just lying. I mean, it's huge. I mean, I've had VPs on here who will credit their success to somebody else. I mean, that's just how it works. But to your point earlier, I mean, there's too many to count, but they do exist. And there's been some instillment in terms of philosophy, probably starting with your dad. And I think that's relevant for a lot of people. I definitely can attest to the same. Unfortunately, it took me many years, to your point, to listen to him. I had a rough time listening in high school and through college. And unfortunately, my grades reflected that. I definitely wasn't getting A's and B's, but now in my late 20s and owning a company, I'm listening a lot more now. So it's a great example, and I think really relevant because it gets you on that point. And whose word are you going to take more seriously than your own dad's, right?
Sure. I mean, the other advice I would give to younger people, really anybody, is the power of networking. Especially in my new role here, I've taken on more of a business development role. And it's funny how many people I talk to frequently and we trade, business development ideas, like what projects go and where and stuff like that. So I think, be friendly to everybody and open-minded. You never know who might be a really valuable connection. If anything, it just grows your network,
Yeah, your network is your net worth is what they're saying these days. And I think it holds a lot of water. And so transitioning a little bit into your leadership style, director of operations, how are you building and developing these high performing teams? We touched on it briefly earlier, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into that. And what would you say your leadership style is? How are you fostering collaboration across the teams and making sure everyone's kind of buying in? Obviously, as we touched on earlier as well, there's deadlines, expiration points. This is not a lackadaisical industry. So how are we overseeing all of that in terms of your personal philosophies and ensuring that everything and everyone is in play at the right time?
Sure. I mean, I think projects like this where timing is everything and there's a lot of moving parts that need to be in sync. I think, establishing really strong team dynamics is huge. I think a lot of that is, like I said before, planning as early as possible, getting involved for myself in the pre-construction process with our estimators, then having a really strong handoff to the operations team so they understand all that. That's really just step one, so they know what the plan is, how we did it, and we can address any of the concerns. I think a lot of it is staying in touch with the projects. We do, weekly project reviews with all the guys. We have this really cool dashboard. Our internal guy set up this software. He's like a mad scientist. It's got all the stats right there, so we can ask questions in real time. So we're pouring concrete. We're moving pretty fast, and you can either make or lose money really fast.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at it at least weekly, you can have an impact if something's going wrong. All right, do we switch out the guys? Is the machine breaking down? Do we need to look for a new ready mix supplier or something like that? Whereas, if you're not reviewing that and going over with the team and you're just kind of out of mind, out of sight, and you look at the end, you're like, wow, we lost some money. What happened? That doesn't do anybody any good. So,
yeah, got to catch it in real time. And so I guess that kind of streamlines us into like technology, for example. I mean, you got the mad scientist building out dashboards. Is that giving you real-time insights into all the analytics and insights on every project, and we're utilizing that to make sure and keep me honest here. I mean, it sounds like the timeline here, just given we're dealing with concrete, is arguably one of the most important aspects of this business, making sure we're on time. How are you, with the innovations in technology lately versus maybe when you got into the industry? I mean, how are you harnessing and utilizing that to maximize productivity and ensuring we're hitting our deadlines?
No, I think it's tons of improvements. Even I've been with Concrete Strategies for about 2 years. Even the past 2 years, I've seen leaps and bounds and changes. I think it's just, as the company grows, we become more sophisticated. So we look at everything from quality control. If we put down 1,000-yard pour and we did something wrong on it, we could rip it up and replace it. That's a big deal. So we want to keep an eye on that. Not only that, I mean, it's our reputation too. A lot of these owners, that's the first thing they look at is the floor slabs. If we do a great job, they're going to be like, that's awesome. You can hire them the next time. If we do a lousy job and it's painful and, we're ripping it out and replacing it and they're still not satisfied with it, it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. We go over our safety stats as well. That's obviously important as well. We've got tons of guys working for us. We want them to go home every single day to their families, just like we do. And then all the financials as well as yields on the concrete. So just, looking at it real time.
Yeah, I can imagine, putting down 1,000 square foot pour or even bigger, and you have to go in and tear it up is ever a good day at the office. Obviously, it's costing tens, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, putting you several weeks behind schedule, bad taste in the mouth, hurting the reputation. It's like a huge L across the board, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, when there's
credit to our teams, they do a fantastic job. There's a lot of things that need to go right and a lot of people that need to execute. They do it day in, day out. So we've very few of those types of issues, which is great.
Actually, no, I believe it. And I was about to say, when those rarities do occur, I mean, is there typically a common denominator in the few that you've seen, and when it's like a complete disaster? And, if you're able to share with us what that is, and then how we obviously learn from those mistakes, how are we kind of implementing those ideals when those rare major problems do happen?
Sure. I mean, there's a variety of things that could happen with concrete. It's a tricky material to work with. I mean, one thing I will credit our guys with doing, if we do make a mistake, it's like, guys, let's talk about it. Don't feel bad about it. Let's get it out there. We do a weekly QA/QC meeting where we do like a lessons learned. It's all right, we screwed this up once. Let's not do it again. Let's learn and get better. I think that's how we've improved over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think creating an environment that, your guys can come in and not necessarily like point fingers, but it's like, if there is a problem, what the heck happened and how do we alleviate it for the future, and having, that work culture when you can have those discussions. Unfortunately, it's not the case across the board. I've talked to a lot of business leaders here on this podcast, most of whom have the exact same mindset and ideals as you, and want that open forum. Like, guys, huge issue. What happened? How can we fix it the next time? But unfortunately, sometimes it's a lot of finger pointing, you screwed up, like you're on strike too. And that doesn't do any good for anybody, because then the employees are pissed and don't want to be there as much. Right. super
Sure.
important to implement that kind of culture and environment, especially with something as tricky and delicate as laying concrete, I'd imagine.
No, absolutely. I think any facet of business, no matter what industry you're in, you kind of need to have that attitude. Otherwise, it just creates an unpleasant work environment. I mean, how
Yeah.
do you get better if you don't review mistakes and sort of go over with people?
Well, a theme that I've kind of seen is like mistakes are almost an opportunity. I mean, obviously we don't want mistakes. We want to alleviate them, as we agree. They cost time. Time costs money, as well as it actually costs physical dollars as well to go and tear everything up and fix it. But it's like a learning opportunity for everybody, to go and be like, hey guys, this is something that we can 100% agree that we're not going to do again in the future, because we've all been part of this failure, this mistake, and now we know what it looks like. We can avoid it moving forward. And I think that's been a theme that I've heard from leaders such as yourself here on the show. Like, everyone seems to be on board with that. There's a reason you guys are all really good leaders, and it's not like throwing the team under the bus, telling the higher ups, hey, the team screwed up, I don't know. It's like, let's discuss it, let's learn from it, let's move forward.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's the message you deliver. I think anytime something goes wrong, if you touched it at some point in time, you kind of need to reflect and say, what could I have done differently to help prevent that so it doesn't happen in the future? I think it's, rarely just one person who has ownership over it. There's a lot of different things that could have gone better. So figure out what you could do better and move on and implement it in the future.
I'm just cracking up because I'm thinking about 1,000,000 square feet of concrete. It's like, there's a lot of people involved, it's not just
Oh
one
yeah.
person. And that's kind of your norm. That's your guys' norm at this scale, right? I mean, there's accountability, of course, as you trickle towards the top, but it's like 1,000,000 square feet. I'm having trouble even conceptualizing what that looks like. There's definitely not one finger to blame at one person, even if there is an error.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Andy, in your experience, and I just want to touch on this a little more, then I want to move on. How are you bridging the gap between customers and suppliers through that human connection? We've kind of talked about the human connection with the internal team, but what about with the suppliers and the customers, and how are you really focused on that strategic relationship building? Are you guys even dealing with suppliers at all? Are you keeping everything internal? I mean, that still lands on your plate, I'd imagine. Can you speak a little bit to that and the importance of obviously customer satisfaction, which speaks for itself, but also with the suppliers who you may be tag teaming some of these larger scale projects with?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different things you can do. One thing I always encourage is guys pick this up and use it. You can call people with it. It's not just a text machine. So talking to people on the phone. The other thing I tell really everybody, I won't generalize to say just younger guys, but don't open with just what you need from the person. You're never going to develop a relationship that way. Open with something. Just be like, hey man, how's your day going? How about this weather? Did you see the Phillies game last night or whatever? Or geez, almost the weekend. Like, it doesn't need to be complicated. Just open with something. You'll get them talking.
Yeah, it doesn't always need to be work. I mean, some of the best leaders I know, it's like, if I hit up my employees, it's usually about anything but work, right? Just to
Yeah.
get that personal human connection, which goes a long way in terms of their happiness, and then in turn, efficiency and productivity at the office. If happier employees, better performance, right?
The other thing I tell guys is like, if you're cold calling a guy or you're nervous or you don't really know him, just tell yourself in your head, this is my best friend. He's my long lost best friend. And just act that way. They'll sort of match your tone. If you're excited to be talking to them, they'll be nice. Unless they're total jerks, in which case you probably don't want to be talking to them anyway.
And the jerks exist, but I like to think there's more nice people out there. And yeah, no, it's like they can hear your smile through the phone. If you're in a good mood and they feel your energy, hopefully it'll be matched. Some people don't. It's just the way of the world. But yeah, I agree entirely. And so that's kind of the approach you take in terms of, obviously, customers. We want to make sure they're satisfied as close to 100% of the time as possible. But with suppliers and partners as well, I mean, that's more or less, the same approach. We want to make sure we're on the same page, have the same values, same goals, and everything like that. That kind of lands on your plate, right? And you're responsible for ensuring that this is something that is happening, and that, we're not seeing any fallouts or bad relationships or anything like that, obviously.
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a similar dynamic with the suppliers, kind of a different direction in the, no pun intended, supply chain. But same thing, pick up the phone and develop a relationship with these guys, go grab lunch with them, go play golf, whatever. And yeah, I mean, we succeed or fail depending on our suppliers. We need ready mix guys with good relationships with us so they take care of us on a giant pour instead of pushing us. We need rebar to show up on time and fabricate it correctly and stuff like that. The other thing, due to the size of our company, we do have some national agreements as well, which we can take advantage of, which is great.
Because you guys obviously aren't manufacturing concrete. You're essentially the GC going and doing the hands-on pour, right?
Generally, yeah. We do have a few of our own batch plants that we can set up on site and produce our own concrete. Generally, those are reserved for really, really big projects, though. So the vast majority, we have, an outside company helping us with that.
Got it. And I think, Andy, I know the answer to this next question, but let's say hypothetically, and this is kind of getting into the challenges element of what you and I talked about. What happens when a supplier is slowing you guys down and you have a deadline and they're not able to keep up with the demand that you guys require? And I know a lot of planning goes into this stuff, but as you know, stuff happens, weather, hurricane, traffic, you name it. How are we managing those situations when everything is planned out perfectly and then you have last minute issues that were unforeseeable and you're not able to get the concrete on site to go and lay 1 million square feet, for example?
Sure. So I'd like to think we're savvy enough in the markets we serve. We sort of know which suppliers can help us with certain size projects. If we don't, for whatever reason, I think we ask generally the right questions up front. We'll tell a guy like, hey, how many plants do you have? How many trucks do you have? We're planning on doing 2.5 to 3, 1,000-yard pours a week on this. Are you going to be able to service that, or is that just too much? And just be honest with the guy. I mean, like, I'd love to use you, but like, this is our expectations. This is unrealistic. Let me know. I can see if we can make it work, but you kind of need to let me know either way. So hopefully any major issues have been vetted ahead of time. There's always the unforeseen. When we're doing most of these projects, we are susceptible to the weather. I think the key to that is just communication with these guys. They lose a couple of days of weather, and they're not only losing their ability to service our site, they've got other customers too that are barking at them that they need to get service first. So just the communication on that, what can they do? The other thing we've run into a certain extent, and hopefully we're through it, is like crazy supply chain issues. For a while, you couldn't get sand, you couldn't get cement, you couldn't get aggregate. And without that, I mean, we're kind of dead in the water. So we've gotten smart on sort of having backup mix designs and maybe changing things. So a lot of mixes, they either have natural sand or man-made sand. For some of them, you could get the man-made sand, but not the natural, or vice versa. So we'd alter the mix design for both, try to get approval on that. Not preferred, because if you're pouring slabs, there's sort of, you might have one with the man-made sand and one with the natural, and it can lead to issues. But, push comes to shove, if we need to get the job done, it's something we can explore.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's like small different characteristics in man-made versus natural, for example. It's funny to hear like supply chain for sand, like there's a shortage of sand. It's kind of an interesting, because usually it's like, oh, there's a shortage of like microchips or lumber. There's a shortage of potatoes actually right now, but it's an interesting concept that there's a shortage of sand. It's like, where is it at? It does sound kind of weird on the ear.
It's wild. It's not a fun conversation to have with the general contractor. I'm sure it's not a fun conversation to have with the owner.
Yeah, or a fun
sand. I don't know. Go to the beach and fill up your truck. What do you want from me?
Exactly. And the customer's probably sitting there going, what the heck do you mean there's no sand? It's not like you have to go build it, but have you run into any issues when you're having a conversation with a vendor or a supplier or a partner, and it's like, hey, like we're looking to pour 3,000 cubic yards a day. Can you handle that? They say yes. And then when push comes to shove, it's time to show up for game day. They're nowhere to be found, or nowhere, I guess what I'm asking is, are you running into issues often? And I would imagine probably not, because you have good relationships with a lot of these guys, but have you ever run into a situation when major overpromise, major under delivery, and having to deal with some of that nonsense?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately it's happened in the past. I'd like to think, like I said, it all harkens back to like, let's start as early as possible in this process and ask the right questions. So, knock on wood, we haven't had that many recently. I mean, it is what it is. Try to have a plan B. Is there another supplier in the area that could do it? Is there some other way we could do it? Can we go to smaller pours, but pour more frequently throughout the week? I think if you are in that situation, you need to be honest with the supplier and say like, hey, this isn't what we talked about. You're not meeting my requirements. It's costing me money and making me look bad at the GC. Like, how are we going to make this work? So obviously you're not going to do the size of pores we need. So what are our options?
Right. And then just take it from there, which of course lands on your plate to manage, the relationships, the supply chain, everything. I mean, really what I'm getting out of this is it sounds like it's a lot of fun to be a director of operations.
All right. That's what I'm here for. Solving
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah. At least
Somebody told me a long time ago, we talked about mentors before. I was upset over some issue. I thought I planned it out and go great. He's like, what are you upset about? He's like, we're here to solve problems. You should feel good when you solve a problem. This was easy and it went seamless. They wouldn't need any of us. I'm like, oh, it's kind of a good point. It's just like,
didn't think about it that way before.
It's really stuck with me. Yeah.
It's a good point though, because when things don't go again, going back to like the learning opportunity, I know it's a little cliche, but it makes a lot of sense because it's like if everything went perfectly all the time, like what would we really be doing in our day to day? That's kind of why we do what we do. Is someone identified some sort of skill set within you, and it's like, yeah, if something goes wrong, obviously we want things to go well most of the time, but when they don't, inevitably, because that's just the way of the world, at least Andy will know how the hell to fix it and take care of it and move forward. So yeah, it's a good point. It's like sounds so simple, but you kind of forget about that stuff sometimes because it's frustrating when things don't go your way, obviously, especially in the workplace.
Sure. I think human tendency, you can do 99 things right in a day, but the one thing that goes wrong, that's what you're going to focus on. So it's reminding yourself, like having those small victories. It's like, my mentor said, like, you solve a problem, like you should feel good about that. Don't just be like, oh, on to the next one.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a good point. And it's applicable not to just work, but I guess many facets of life as well. I think that mindset is good for, I guess, maintaining an even keel. Even in life, things don't necessarily go your way 100% of the time, maybe 99% of the time, to your point. And then that 1%, it's like super pissed about it. And it's like, you know what, things are going pretty good overall. Like let's stay in the middle, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of things that are just out of your control, but what you can control is how you react to it. If I get upset, am I going to make the best decision and successfully get through this? Probably not. Maybe I will. If I stay positive and kind of say like, all right, this didn't go to plan, but I've solved problems like this before. We'll get through it. Let's figure it out. Keep sort of that positive mindset, like, eye on the prize. Let's get this across the finish line. Generally that's going to go a whole lot better. So.
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure that out, especially the intangible stuff, letting go of things that were completely out of my control that didn't go my way. I had a brief stint in college tennis, and my tennis coach was like, dude, there's literally nothing you could have done. Why are you freaking out about it? And it was kind of the same moment you had when I was like, oh yeah, that's a pretty good point. Maybe I should relax. There's literally nothing I could have done. It's just not going to go my way right now. That's it.
It's why it's good to have mentors and people you can trust and just kind of like word vomit too. A lot of times, it still happens to me. I think it happens to everybody at every level. Sometimes you just need like to say it and have somebody hear it and be like, all right, I feel better now.
Yeah, hearing it from someone else, I agree entirely. You hear it from someone else, it's like, okay, because you can tell yourself internally as much as you want. Sometimes you don't necessarily believe yourself. Someone else says it, it's like that extra verification, validation. It's like, okay, yeah, I think I'm more on board with this now.
Yeah.
But Andy, moving forward, as we look into the future of construction and engineering industries, we briefly touched on technology earlier. Is that kind of the direction that you see things going in terms of what is going to have the biggest impact in terms of change in your day to day? Or is there anything else that you foresee us seeing here in the next 5-10 years?
I mean, I think it's inevitable. Technology's coming whether we like it or not. I think a couple interesting things I've seen, increase in use on drones on project sites and different types of imagery. So we're working on a project in New Hampshire right now. They fly a drone weekly to get an aerial site to capture all the progress. They have an overlay of the drawings on it. It's really cool. I haven't seen that before. So I was pretty impressed with that. I mean, I've seen in the past guys flying drones and just taking progress pictures. So that's pretty neat too. The other thing, I don't know how it's going to come to fruition in what we do. We do a lot of industrial projects, data centers, manufacturing type buildings, but be interested to see what happens with 3D printing. I think probably just touching the tip of the iceberg. And frankly, I know next to nothing about it other than, make something up in a 3D model and it'll print it out for you. But
yeah, I think 3D printing will have a huge impact on supply chain specifically. Not sure directly how would it impact, say, like concrete, for example, but the best example I ever heard of maintaining a healthy supply chain through 3D printing, once we get to a point when it's more mainstream and being utilized on a more regular level, is like if you have like a 94 Honda Civic, your bumper gets ripped off. And obviously those Civics will ride for, 500,000 miles, if not more. Obviously they don't make the bumpers for the 94 Civics. You just go to a 3D printer, they'll print it out for you, just quantity one, because they're not going to just, go to the factory, build out one unit. I mean, that's not in their best interest either. You go and they can print it out to the exact specifications, and boom, you're on your way. So
that's awesome. I wish they had that last fall when I hit a deer and they couldn't get the parts for my car, so they ended up totaling it.
Oh, geez. Okay. So yeah, so you could have been if 3D printing was further along, they could have just printed out the new part for you right there, and maybe a few days or a few weeks later, and you would have been on your way, I guess. But
yeah, my understanding is they go to new models in cars. Basically, the factory stopped making third-party parts for them, or at least that's the trend it's going in. Yeah. So if you got an older model and something goes on it, you may or may not be able to get the part, which kind of sucks.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, it's almost as if they're just hoping that you'll just go and buy a whole new car at that point. It's like, oh, we don't make the parts. Sorry, I guess you're out of luck.
Yeah. I mean, it stinks when your car's only 5 years old, though.
Brutal. Because cars back in the day will run for much longer than that. It's like the refrigerators, it's your grandma's fridge runs for 50 years. And then now the fridges today, maybe 5-10, you got to replace them.
It's so funny you say that. This is way off topic, but my grandmother moved to be closer to my parents when we were in college. So we were cleaning out our old house. I'm in the basement. There's this ridiculously old refrigerator. And I'm like, Nana, why'd you keep this? It doesn't work. She's like, it works. I'm like, it works. She's like, plug it in. Plugged it in, it started humming like nothing. It was probably 60 years old.
Yeah, it was built in the 40s or whatever. It's working as well as the Kenmore in the kitchen. Yeah, no, exactly. So, no, it's a good point. We'll see where 3D printing goes. And obviously, I feel like a lot of the, GCs, supply chain directors and directors of operation that I've talked to here, it's a lot about AI as well, of course, in terms of, 3D mapping, predictive analytics, stuff like that, really optimizing the supply chain and basically at the end of the day saving costs, because you have so many more insights. There's so much information in your data that aren't being utilized because it takes a data scientist maybe 4 or 6 weeks to go and pull those interesting insights out and feed them back to the relevant parties. But nowadays you feed your data to some sort of AI platform and it spits out insights instantly, no matter how many rows are in your Excel sheet or whatever. So a lot of good stuff happening, a lot of changes on the horizon for sure. And Andy, last question here before we wrap up. For you, like what are you most proud of achieving thus far? I know you have a lot of career left. You've come quite the journey already. What are you most proud of, and what are you most looking forward to here in the future, given what you've accomplished thus far?
It's a good question. I've worked on a lot of different noteworthy projects. Certainly, I'm proud of that. It's pretty cool to say I've done that. The one I referenced earlier in DC where we built a platform over the highway. I mean, it was right up in the New York Times. It was right up in ENR, all sorts of stuff like that. It was pretty cool. I think at the end of the day, it's just, I hope I've had a positive impact on other people who worked with me, either through, helping them get the job done, mentoring some younger guys and teaching them a few different things. I mean, that's really what I would hope my legacy would be. He was really helpful and a good team player.
Yeah, absolutely. And to our point earlier, that's all within your control and seems like it's something you've done already and something you can continue developing and doing into the future as well, which obviously brings a ton of value, especially when in a leadership position. So, Andy, thanks so much for everything. This has been a terrific conversation. Really appreciate the insights into everything and anything that you've kind of experienced the last several years in building out your career. Good luck to you, man. Maybe we'll have you back on the show in a year or so, check in, see about those trends that you predicted and see where we stand maybe this time next year and talk about it then.
Anytime you want me, I'll be here.
You got it, man. I may careful what you wish for. I may be bugging you here sooner than you think.
Fair enough.
Cool, man. Take care. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.